Welcome once again to the Russell Brown Show, and this presentation I'm calling Think Difference. In this project, we're going to enhance a photograph. In this case, it could be a portfolio piece or a fine advertising photograph. We're going to start with the image you see here, and we're going to make it look like this. So let's get started. Let's close this image and go to Adobe Bridge. Now I have Adobe Bridge currently running, so I'm going to hold down my Shift and Command key on the Macintosh or my Shift and Control key on the PC. Then I'm going to select the letter O, and it automatically switches us over to Adobe Bridge. Now this project starts with 3 individual images. These were all taken with the same camera, which was set on a tripod. I have one light source, and I would like to enhance this photograph with reflectors instead of a second light source. Now it's time to start merging the photos together. As we saw in this first image, it looks pretty good, but we like the cast light happening here, defining the edge of this box in the second image. And we like this highlight running down the side of this third image. Let's merge these all together. I'm going to select all the images again in the bridge. I could open these all individually in Photoshop and then painfully move them one by one into the same file. But there's an easier way. Here, under the Tools menu, I'm going to use this fine service called Dr. Brown Services. Now, Dr. Brown Services does not ship with Adobe Photoshop CS2. You can only get it by downloading it from russellbrown.com, as you see on your screen now. Then go to the Tips and Techniques section and look for Dr. Brown Services. Be sure and download the Easy Installer for both the Macintosh and the PC. And the scripts will be automatically placed in the correct location. It's that easy. Now, on with our story. I'm going to use one of these services called Merge-O-Matic. Merge-O-Matic will merge any selected files in Adobe Bridge into one Photoshop file. It will merge JPEG images, TIFF images, and even RAW images into one layered file. I'm going to select that now. Of course, it has processed all of these. We now have all 3 of those images displayed here. Let's hide Bridge for a moment and start our project here in Photoshop. So let's move our attention right over here to the Layers palette and see what we've got going on here. I'm going to turn off these top 2 layers that were created with Dr. Brown's Merge-O-Matic, just like that. So we can take a look here at our base layer. Let's then turn these on one by one and see how they change the image. Here with this second layer, we of course can see that it highlights the right-hand side of this wooden box. And here with this topmost layer, we can see that it is highlighting and giving us an edge to our wine bottle over here on the left. So they both are adding some significant changes to our overall image. Now, how can we blend these together correctly? Well, first of all, before we do any blending, we want to ensure that these images are truly pin registered. Now, of course, the camera was on a tripod, and there were no earthquakes to change the arrangement of my wine bottle and box, so I can assume there have been no changes. However, there are always subtle variations between the 2 frames that you take with your camera. So you have to correct for those first before you start to blend these 2 together. That's where my magic difference comes into play with this demo. I'm going to first turn on the visibility of this second layer. I'm going to then target the second layer as you see here. I'd like to adjust the position of this to make sure that it is pin registered on top of the base. To do that, I move up here to the word Normal. For my blending modes, I click and hold and go down to Difference right here. What we're seeing is the difference between the top layer and the bottom layer. In other words, when I moved the lighting around, I'm now seeing how the lighting has changed. We're going to take advantage of this in just a moment. But for now, we're going to use this to determine whether the two are pin registered. The next step you need to do is to zoom in. I'm going to zoom in here to at least 100%. Then I'm going to position this so I can see some of my graphics and some of my image here. What I'm looking for is a difference between these two. And then I'm going to adjust the difference so that they're pin registered. I'm going to select my Move tool now. And notice I still have layer number 2 targeted. What I want to achieve is a perfect black image with no image visible. To do that, I need to use my arrow keys in combination with my Move tool, and I've targeted a layer. Watch what happens when I nudge this to the left. I can then see more of the image. That means there's a greater difference. We want to nudge this into position there. That looks pretty good. Where the least amount of image is visible. It's got to be as close to black as possible. Now, of course, we can see this edge to the wine bottle because the lighting has changed. I'm looking for areas that have not been adjusted by the lighting. These edges here around the text are a key area to look for. This looks pretty good. We now know that it is as close as possible to being pin registered with the image on the base. Now we can adjust this back here to normal. Once again, I'm going to turn this layer off, then turn the top layer back on, and I'm going to do the same thing. Notice I have to target the top layer as well as turn on its visibility, then adjust it to difference, and we can clearly see there's a problem here. Again, with the Move tool, I'm going to start to adjust this. In that case, I just hit the Move tool twice with the down arrow, and I'm going to try it to the left and try it to the right. It appears that that is the position it should be in. It looks like it was off by 2 pixels, which could be a significant problem when blending these images together. So now we go back in here, set this back to normal. We've now pin registered them. I'm going to double click on my hand tool to see the whole image just like this. So now we can start to blend them together. Let's start with this second layer, and I'm going to show you the easiest way to blend them together. Then I'm going to show you the more difficult way to blend them together to make your brain explode. So let's start easy, then move to the exploding brain sequence. Okay, layer number 2 is on. I simply and easily can blend these together with opacity. I'm clicking here on the word opacity from my layers palette, clicking and holding. Then I can scroll here to the left and scrub the value down. Here it goes all the way down to 0. Cast your eyes on the right hand side of the box. As I move this up slowly, I can start to fill in the reflector into that side, as well as some reflections over here in the wine bottle itself. So I'm going to move it to a value right about there, just visually decide that that's how much light I want casting into the bottle and into the side of the box. That looks great. And of course, you can always adjust it as you start working on this. This is the way to start the process with opacity. But there may be areas of the image, for example, the reflector over here on the right-hand side, that I do not want as part of the image. Then I need to bring in a layer mask. To do that, of course, I target the image, move down here to the base of the layers palette, and click on this icon to add a layer mask. Then simply and easily, here with a brush from my tool palette, and of course set it to black here, and make sure my opacity is set correct over here, I can go up here in the upper right hand corner and clean up that reflector there. If there's anything else I need to clean up, I can go in and do that as well. Of course, I'm using 100% opacity. I can adjust things, of course, by using different opacities for this black brush. Thus, if I set it to 50% opacity, I could reduce the amount of image by 50%. But most of that I've done here by adjusting the opacity of the layer itself. So there are a combination of ways you can do this, both by brushing the elements in and out with a layer mask, or using your opacity for the overall layer. And just as a refresher, you know that if you paint with black, you remove the image, and if you paint with white, you can recover the image back. So it's non-destructive. Okay, that's technique number 1. That's the easy way. Now, let's talk about the complex way. I'm going to turn this layer off, and we're going to turn the top layer on here. To begin with, let's go back to the difference mode again. Normal down to difference. Now, we saw earlier that setting it to difference isolated those areas of the image that we wanted to alter. In this case, you can see this highlight along the edge of the left-hand side of the bottle. We've got a difference map that we can use as a mask. Wow! Hold on. Your brains are about to explode. We're going to the channels palette. And I'm going to click on the red channel. I'm going to use the red channel because it gives me the least amount of noise from all the channels. I'm going to click on that channel and drag it down here to the base of the channels palette over this icon. And it duplicates it. Of course, you would not want to alter your original red channel. That would change your image. So we have a copy. We're targeting the copy, and we're going to bring up our levels control. So here in levels, I'm going to first select this white point for the highlights. Move it over to the left, and open up these areas of highlight along the edge of the bottle. I can also select the black point here and move it to the right, and thus reduce some of the highlighted areas that I do not want as part of my mask. So what I have now is a really nice mask based upon only the areas that have changed. I'm going to click OK, and of course I can go back in with my brush tool again and paint away this reflective card right down here like this. I'm just painting with black. I'm essentially making a mask. Those areas that are white will show through. Those areas that are black will be masked. This looks great. However, I see some little lines up here that I don't want. So I'm going in and painting the area with black for those areas that I don't want to be part of the adjustment. This looks great. We need to load this as a selection. If your brain hasn't exploded yet, it soon will. Holding down the Command key on the Macintosh or the Control key on the PC, the icon changes over the targeted red copy icon, as you see here. I click with the mouse. It then loads that as a selection. The values in the image are turned into a selection. But wait, we want to go back and apply this to the image, but we must first make sure that we turn back on the RGB image here, clicking RGB at the top. Then back to layers. Then target our layer, turn off the difference, go back to normal. We don't want it to be different, we want it normal in this case. We have a small little selection down the edge of the bottle, right? We can see everything, including the card. Watch carefully as I move down here to the base of the layers palette. I'm going to add a layer mask. Yes, he's going to click on the button, and the card disappears. And the accent to the edge of the bottle is still there, and some accents to the stone are there as well. Why, that's amazing. We created a mask from those areas which were different and then applied it to our image. But wait, there's always more. There's the ability to adjust this. Targeting the mask here, as you see, I can then run levels on the mask. Let's focus in over here. I'm going to zoom in on this edge of the bottle. Then I'm going to adjust the mask. Watch how I can open up the mask or close it down merely by adjusting the levels found in the mask. So I can have a brighter reflection or a softer reflection. I can control this with the white point or the midpoint here or even the black point here to make subtle adjustments to this and get this just the way I want. Sometimes I find that I will actually blur this mask. Let's give this a try. Targeting this mask, I'll go up to Filter, down to Blur, and I might run just a little bit of Gaussian blur on this. I'm going to move my cursor over here so I can see it, and then you can go in here and adjust it. I'm not adjusting the image, I'm adjusting the mask, which is then revealing the adjustments through it. And as you soften this and you look over here on the image, you can see that the harsh edge that it had earlier is gone. I've softened that edge a bit. So it's filtering through this soft mask. Okay, enough of this. You've just seen two techniques to then blend these three images together. Let's double click on my hand tool so we can see our results. So we have our top image, which we defined the mask for the adjustments by using the difference setting under the mode adjustments. Then with this second layer here, which highlights this area, we simply used opacity and a layer mask together. So you have two choices. Okay, this is looking pretty good, but I want to do some final adjustments. A couple more things. To do that, I'm going to flatten this entire image. I'm going to go out here to the flyout arrow and down to flatten image. I'm simplifying this because I want to use the history brush. Selecting the history brush here from the tool palette. Then going over here to the history palette over here, I want to make sure that my first instance of history is currently selected here. This is crazy, but we're going to paint with history. The great thing about painting with history, it's like painting with dodging and burning, because we're going to multiply and screen this image into our final image that we see here on the screen. Watch what happens. I'm going to zoom back out here a bit so we can see this image like this. Of course, I have my history brush selected, and as you see up here in my options bar, I have set the history brush to multiply. Its opacity is at 20%. That's pretty good. Now watch what happens. Let's increase the size of this brush a little bit here with the closed bracket from the keyboard. Now I'm going to paint over the surface down here. Do you see it starting to get darker down here? Let me zoom in because you can barely see this. And I'll reduce the size of my brush. As I go in here and I paint with multiply, it's pulling a copy of the original image, and it essentially lets me overlay or multiply the two together. I can scroll over here and I can start to paint out these areas that are a little bit too light. I can go in and actually work over the image and multiply the two together and get rid of areas and darken them. So this is great. But wait, check this out. I'm going to make a selection of this area of the wood panel door on this box. I'm now going to select my lasso tool, and I'm going to click here, and I'm using my Option or Alt key in combination with this tool, so I get this rubber band that follows me around as I make my selection. I'm making a selection of only this area that I would like to alter. In this case, it's the light falling on this door. There's my selection. I select my history brush again, still set to multiply. Let's bring the size of this brush up, again with my favorite feature, the closed or open bracket from the keyboard. And then I'm going to drop this opacity of this multiply brush down to 10%. I'm going to hold down the Shift key and then the number 1 key to adjust this to an opacity of 10%. Now watch. I'm painting over the surface in 10% increments, and as you can see this, the wood grain is starting to come back. I'm dropping the value overall. Let's double click on the hand tool so we can see this, and let's hide that edge with Command H on the Macintosh or Control H on the PC. Go back to our history brush and continue painting. You can go too far with this. I'm going to drop back there. I'm going to add a little bit more on that side. I want to balance the value out across this. And there's actually a little hot spot there near the handle. A couple clicks will drop that hot spot down. And then you can adjust this and pull this back so it's not quite as bright as it was before. Of course, that was done with multiply. So now, what if we wanted to add a little accent and lighten an area within this image? For example, over here on this spur. Well, first, we have to deselect the selection that we currently have. Here, you can see the selection. Don't be confused by a selection that's hidden. Let's go up here to Select and Deselect. Now, let's go in and paint over this spur. But let's switch this from the mode of multiply to screen. So now we're going to lighten this image, of course, in history, with the original image. Let's give this a try. So now let's reduce the size of this brush, of course, with the open bracket from my keyboard. I can go in here and just make some little clicks on this, and it lightens it up and opens up those values. That gives me a little bit of sparkle and highlight enhancement to this metal. Yes, we've now finished our final project, and you too have learned how to correct your images with a difference. Give it a try.